Thank you for tuning in to this week's Muffed Punt podcast. My name is Brandon, and I am joined by Ralph. How are we doing today, Ralph?
Doing good, Brandon. Thanks for having me again.
I'm always happy to have you. So week 4 of the XFL has come and gone, and I think we had another pretty decent week of football. How about you, Ralph?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Some pretty decent scores and little change of pace in some games. Who you thought would win didn't. Little parity showing.
And I think it's cool because I think what we're going to do each week is kind of maybe do a game of the week, and we'll talk a little bit more about one of the specific games a little more in-depthly, and then we'll give the scores of the week. And I think for us this week, it was the Houston Roughnecks game versus the Dallas Renegades. It ended up being a pretty close game all in the end. The Houston Roughnecks pulled it out 27-20, and it was off to a rough start for the Dallas Renegades as Landry Jones, former Pittsburgh Steeler, threw 3 interceptions just in the very first quarter. Not a way you want to start the ball game.
No, kind of a sad start to a game, especially for a former NFL quarterback.
You know, it's one of the things that we talked about last week is, does the XFL have enough in the quarterback department to really be able to deliver the type of product that's going to keep everybody tuning in? It's one of the tough things when you get off to these really inconsistent starts. But like I said, it's kind of one of the things you kind of have to live through in this league right now. And I think next year, the product that you're going to get is going to be a lot better than what you're going to have compared to this year. But I honestly am pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and as you said, as they grow and as the cohesion starts to take its hold on teams, you're going to see that teams get better with their offense, teams get better with their defense, special teams, and you're going to see that these teams start to gain an identity.
And speaking of that, I think to see the opposite side from Landry Jones with PJ Walker on the Houston Roughnecks side, he showed up again and balled out. I mean, we've kind of gone back and forth about how hard is it to really look that good versus these types of defenses and this level of play. But honestly, I mean, to me, he's heads and tails above everybody else in the league right now.
Yeah, and he's got the stats to prove it and to back that up. He had a pass in that game that was NFL level, and he's done that every week. So it's a pretty consistent basis that he's doing this, and you can't help but think that he could be an NFL quarterback or a backup or play some sort of role at a higher level. He's playing that well.
Yeah, and it's kind of a shame. The game was super close throughout the entire game, and once Landry Jones became injured late in the third, it just really everything went out the window for Dallas. And after that, it's just, what do? You have to then kind of scramble to find what your backup options are going to be. And in a league where we don't have a ton of QB talent, the drop-off between QB1 and QB2 is going to be extreme.
Very. And, like I said last week, there's a quarterback need in the NFL, and you have a not as steep of a drop off, but there's a drop off from elite to an average quarterback, so to say. So when you go to a league like this where it's new, it's fresh, there's not a lot of people in the pipeline, so to say, coming up and through the ranks, and not a lot of competition either. So as that grows, you're going to see quarterback play increase and get better, but for now it's a pretty steep decline.
And it's nice also to see with Dallas, once Landry Jones kind of started to find his footing a little bit, they were still relying on their run game to kind of keep them in the game and keep momentum in their favor. And Lance Dunbar seemed to do a really good job, the former Ram, in going and keeping his team in it. He got that one real nice score for them. And then it just honestly, once Landry Jones got hurt after that, it just kind of took all the wind out of the sails. They threw that pick towards the very end of the game, and the Houston Roughnecks were just able to seal the deal. So they're going to move to 4-0 on the early part of the season here. Now we're almost already halfway through. It's only a 10-week season, so going to be fun. I like that we have the MVP vote that's early going here for PJ. I think it's pretty obvious. I think that he's the top one so far. The other games that were pretty surprising, the DC Defenders, man, I don't know what happened to them, but they came into this league rolling, and they have just been stumbling through the last 2 weeks. And the Tampa Bay Vipers beat them 25-0. And the Tampa Bay Vipers came into that game without a single win on their record. They've had issues in the locker room. Their backup quarterback, once off the team, Mark Trestman, has not really been as an exemplary a coach as many would have hoped.
He wasn't an exemplary coach for the Bears.
Yeah, so I think it's tough to see. I was really surprised with that game because watching them come in, I really didn't expect anything from the Vipers, and man, they just rolled all over DC. And that's the one thing with DC is I thought their defense was really one of their strongest attributes as a team. But I wonder if they're starting to lose faith in Cardale Jones a little bit because he's just had a hard time throwing tough picks and he's just starting to force the ball a little bit. And you saw that with Landry Jones in that first quarter because he really started forcing the ball at the end of the first, trying to like whiz it in there. And it was just making the situation worse.
Right. And, the Vipers came in, like you said, 0-3. They got their first win. And the Defenders now are 2-0 at home and 0-2 on the road. So, as you can say, is that a factor for DC right now? I don't know.
They have their coach is a little like, I don't want to say lackadaisical, but he's not like roll up in your face. He's kind of a chill guy. So I wonder when they go out on the road if that doesn't carry as well as when they're at home. Because it's a little easier when you're just kind of like with your boys per se, hanging out, that you can, when you're in familiar territory, to kind of pull on that when you need it to make it happen for you. But then when you're away, it's like, where do you find that same energy from?
Right.
So the New York Guardians were able to pull out a win 17-14 over the Los Angeles Wildcats. No Matt McGloin this week. It was a pretty decent game all in all. One of the things that I thought that was very noticeable when you watched the game on TV was the lack of attendance at the game. And that's one of the things that we talked about last week, is I feel like that's going to be a really big detriment to this league, is when they're trying to fill NFL stadiums in basically anywhere but Seattle. So I think it's been really tough for them to do that. And this last week, the lower bowl wasn't even full. So, I mean, when you're watching that on TV, I feel like if you're on the edge of wanting to know if you're going to really be into this or give this your time to go and get into it, I think when you see that on TV, it's really hard to be like, I'm going to invest my time in this, because clearly the fans of the team haven't even invested their time yet.
And that's kind of, what I brought up to you earlier is it's hard for me as an NFL fan and an Eagles fan, and seeing that product and the level of competition at that at the NFL level is so much greater. My question is, if these players in these games, and you strip away their uniforms and you take away the Houston Roughnecks uniform and the Dallas Renegades uniform in that game this past weekend, and you put on a Houston Texans uniform and a Dallas Cowboy uniform, same game, use the same video, just change uniforms, would I be watching it more? I don't know, because I can't tell if the level of play in this league is equal to the talent, or if the level of play in this league would be a equal or almost equal product to that of the NFL.
Did you watch the AAF at all?
I did not, because I didn't give it a split second, to be honest with you.
I think if you had watched that a little bit, I think it'd be a little bit more apparent to you, because when you have something to compare it to, a different feeder league. I did watch some of the XFL the first time around. The whole nickname thing kind of really threw me off.
It was too gimmicky.
Yeah, it was super gimmicky. And so I feel like this time around, for me, it's been a much more enjoyable product because I was just willing to give it a chance.
Right.
For me, I look at a couple different things. I just want the NFL to have competition, for one. And I don't mean this necessarily mean direct competition, but just some other football product other than college football right now that can give it something to cause it to have to grow. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. Also giving chances for guys that wouldn't normally get chances. And I think that part, to me, is one of the best parts of the whole thing, is seeing these guys that maybe had an early misstep in their career or had an injury that took too long to heal or what have you, is getting another crack at trying to make some money in their life.
Yes. And, it's got NFL backing as far as former players. I mean, Artis Payne, you've got Donnell Pumphrey, a former Eagle. He's in the league. There's several former Eagles in this league. Donnell Pumphrey is probably the most notable of all of them.
I've really wanted to see him show out, and it just hasn't happened, and I'm just so bummed about it.
I wanted him to show out when he was with the Birds, but he just never got the opportunity, or when he did have the opportunity, he really didn't take it very far.
I was excited when we drafted him. I was like, man, they have really got a chance here to
The
get like a
next
sleeper
Sproles.
pick, And then it just nothing ever came to fruition. And then it was like we took like 15 running backs. So
And and again, I go back to, is it the level of talent? Is it the uniforms? Is it the new rules? Like, what is it that's not fully pulling me in right now? And I can't really put my finger on it.
I feel like it's a mixture of for me, when I watch it, the things that pull me out of it are the lack of attendance at the stadiums when they are at the bigger stadiums. Some of the uniforms I feel like are a little clip arty, like they're not super. The Vipers uniforms I think look like trash.
They're pretty cheesy.
Yeah, but I know people that like them. I mean, I've listened to a lot of XFL stuff on YouTube and different things, and I know some people really dig them. So I mean, to each their own. I get it. But I really think I love the DC Defenders uniforms. I wouldn't change those at all if they did, even if they did like an update down the road. I like the New York Guardians. I think they look sharp. Their uniforms. The Battlehawks are pretty cool. I like their colors and the scheme and everything's pretty awesome. It's just some of the other ones are just leave me wanting a little bit more. I feel like I could make a better uniform in Madden or something.
And speaking of the Battlehawks, I've been impressed to see how many fans have come to their games. I mean, you take the Guardians game and where there was really nobody there, and then you look at a game like this, like the St. Louis Battlehawks, and pretty much most of that lower bowl was relatively full. So
yeah, St. Louis and Seattle's fans have really shown up for the XFL, and I think they're pretty grateful for that for sure.
Right, and of course, St. Louis, they had a team ripped from their hearts, and moved to LA. So having football back in St. Louis is a pretty big deal. So I think the XFL would do well to cater to cities like that and put them in smaller stadiums, and like a MLS soccer stadium. If Philadelphia got a team, throw them at PPL Park or Subaru Park, whatever it's called now, and have that look full. You give yourself the illusion of a better product and a more popular product, supply and demand kind of thing.
I think that would take it very far. Is that where the Union play?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a good spot for sure. I don't know if they have plans on going to Philly at some point, but I'm pretty sure they would find a pretty decent market there of people that would show up to events. We're always looking for more reasons to go out and do things in this area for sure. And I think it's good to have all those different options. And I know it's for sports fervor, this area is pretty second to none for people that just can't get enough.
And I think a team would do well here as far as the XFL expanding. I don't see it happening right away, probably not for a couple of years, because like we've been talking about, you've got a quarterback problem, you've got a talent problem. Now, if you give them a couple of years to start pulling people from college ranks, right straight from college, maybe somebody that goes undrafted says, well, I'm not going to the NFL because I'm not going to get a fair shake. I'm going to the XFL. And maybe they start to, like I said last week, kind of bleed the league, bleed the NFL a little bit and start pulling talent from there. And, as we see that develop, I think you're going to see the XFL product become better.
Yeah, and for the St. Louis Battlehawks that we were just talking about, they won their game 23-16 over the Seattle Dragons. Jordan Tiamu had another great game, and he's another guy, I think, other than PJ Walker, you're looking at quarterback talent coming out of the XFL. I think he's right up there for me. I didn't really have a lot of really any kind of feelings about him coming into the league. It was just kind of like a wait and see sort of deal. I know he was 2 years in college, and he did fairly well, and so I wasn't really expecting too much, but I think he's done a pretty good job with the St. Louis Battlehawks. And I mean, I wouldn't put him up at PJ Walker level, but he's not too far behind. And so last week we were talking a little bit we were mentioning about that XFL rule changes and wondering if those things would make their way into the NFL at some point. So last week, Packers CEO Mark Murphy said he's intrigued by the XFL's kickoff formation, noting the increased safety would decrease speed. And a day later, Will Mashup said the kickoff may be where college football is headed. And on Friday, the Citadel announced the adoption of several XFL rules for their spring game on March 7th, among them the kickoffs, the no point after touchdown. So they're going to actually go for the whole 1 point, 2 point, 3 point. I didn't think they'd do. I thought that would be the least one they would do. And so for college to even look at giving out test games for this, and then the last one for the double forward pass, it's really cool to see that they're at least trying them out in games that I think certain college teams, you could argue, could probably blow away most XFL teams like Alabama or Clemson or what have you. I don't know if those are going to be the specific ones that are going to be testing anything out there, but it's going to be cool to see possibly higher talent players trying out these things to see what happens when we give them a little bit of leeway.
And as I mentioned previously, the NFL's refusal to grow is going to, cause the XFL to continue to innovate. And as they continue to innovate, it's going to be harder and harder for the NFL to make those changes if they become mainstream. So by college kind of taking these on, maybe that legitimizes it for the NFL to adopt. But then again, like I said before, if the NFL adopts them, then you're basically legitimizing the XFL. And what I think would be a wise idea in the NFL's part is to make the XFL a feeder league. Make it the D League like in the NBA. Make it the minor leagues like baseball. Make them, make that your tryout time. Make that, your think lab. Make that the place where you try out new rules, try out new things, try out new offenses, the double pass, the different kickoff. I mean, this is a place where you can kind of tinker and develop and grow and use the ideas and see them in play before you put them into the major leagues or the NFL.
And I think another thing that's going to be interesting, I think a threat possibly to the XFL that I didn't really think about last week is all the talk with the new CBA with the NFL and the possible expansion that the league might be going through. If the NFL already has what you believe and I believe to be a quarterback problem, then where are all these other quarterbacks going to come from? You're going to need at least, 6 more NFL caliber quarterbacks if we're going to add in a couple more teams here. And the other thing that we're going to talk about a little bit too, as well, is along with that, we're talking about possibly a proposed change to the NFL playoffs. So, but before we jump into the changes with the playoffs, if you give that a little bit of thought and ponder that around in your mind a little bit, do you really think that to me, I was like, man, you know what? I didn't even think about that, because if the NFL is expanding, is that going to possibly threaten the XFL's expansion? Because cities are going to more want an NFL team than what they're going to want an XFL team. I don't know if maybe that would end up kind of hurting where they want to expand to. And then in that also, if the NFL is going to need more quarterbacks, are they going to do more of what they can to knock the XFL off so that they don't have to worry about competition for players that they might need to diminish their product?
That's a good point, and one that I really haven't thought much about. But what happens if the NFL wants to expand? I'm just picking a random city. Let's say Portland. They want to expand to Portland, and the XFL does at the same time. Does that, is there a pecking order there? Would Portland, obviously Portland's going to choose the NFL, or a city in general is going to choose the NFL over the XFL right now. But you're almost playing as the XFL second fiddle to the NFL all the time.
I think the advantage would likely be in the XFL's favor, only because there's always going to be guys that can't make the NFL league. There's always going to be guys that mess up. There's always going to be guys that get hurt. There's always going to be those guys. So if they're out there and you do a good job of kind of using those folks to your advantage, then I think that there would always be a space for that product. But if you have hopes of bringing this to an actual point where it could possibly compete with the NFL, then I think that that's not going to be a good thing for them.
And that's why I think if the XFL just finds their niche and stays in their lane, so to say, and becomes almost a developmental league, I think that's the best for both parties.
So ESPN reported on Wednesday, citing league sources, the new CBA is expected to change the NFL's playoff structure to include 7 teams from each conference. According to the report, the proposed playoff expansion would increase the field from its current 12-team format to 14 teams, with each team's conference top seed getting a first-round playoff bye. The playoff format change could happen as soon as the 2020 season, according to the report. If this format existed for the 2019 season, the Pittsburgh Steelers at 8-8 and the Los Angeles Rams at 9-7 would have made the playoffs. The Steelers would have played a wild card game against the Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium, while the Rams would have played the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau. The NFL's current playoff format has been in use since the 2002 season, when the Houston Texans joined the league and gave it its 32 teams. So what do you think, Ralph? Do you think that the proposed NFL playoff format is going to be a good thing? Do you think that this is something that's inevitable for the league? Or do you think that this is going to be something to where we see the players this time actually fight back. We've seen the Pouncey brothers talk about possibly setting up a strike fund. So we know that there's a possibility that we might lose out on football next year. But what are your thoughts?
One, it's inevitable because there's money involved. The owners want the money, the players want the money. It's just a matter of ironing out all the details before they get to that point. So it's inevitable. It's going to happen. You're going to get a 17-game season. They're going to try to expand the playoffs. I don't like it. I don't like the expanded playoff note, the idea of that, because listen, Kansas City would have played the Steelers, a 9-7, or excuse me, an 8-8 team. And everybody talks about, even with the current playoff format, a team like the Eagles this year getting in kind of by the skin of their teeth, and people saying, well, they don't deserve it. It should be the best record. And I think by expanding the playoffs, you're just opening yourself up to more of that chatter, and it's going to dilute the playoffs in my mind. I mean, at what point do you stop and just let everybody get into the playoffs at the end and it become a free-for-all? So there's got to be some sort of stopping point for this. And I know it's been this way since 1990, and everybody's kind of used to this and change, and we don't want to change. But in the end, it's a better product. It's better for the league if they have more exciting games with better record teams playing for the those meaningful playoff games.
I think you could argue that instead of it really diminishing the postseason, that I think it diminishes the regular season, because then you're basically just shooting for a 500 record. It's really tough to have excitement in those areas for sure. And I can understand how that would kind of pull away from the joy of the playoff format. I think what they're looking for is that hope of having that underdog team that comes on top and has that crazy story to allow that, all the press and what have you, and possibly smaller market teams to get in and get more ways to possibly win. But I am a person that absolutely loves the underdog story. Like, I always root for the underdog. But I feel like, to me, if you're forcing it, that's not as special as if it just happens. Like with the Cubs and the Indians in the World Series, it's like that just happened. And it's like, man, it's two teams who haven't won in decades, and this is so cool. And I feel like when you force it, you take away from that magic.
And, the only place you see a consistent underdog is the NCAA tournament for men's basketball. There always seems to be a Cinderella story coming out of the field of 64 that seems to surprise everybody. In the NFL, you're not surprising anybody. At that point in the season, you are what your record says you are. And an 8-8 team is an 8-8 team. I think, what was it, the Steelers the one year? They were a wild card team and actually won it all. But how often does that really happen? How often is that going to happen? I don't see it. And I think, like you said, it diminishes the regular season, because I don't know if I've heard this or if I'm just imagining this, but what would it do to the divisions in football? Are we getting rid of divisions in football and then making it East-West and taking the best record out of each conference? Because if you do that, then you're taking away rivalries. So where does this stop is what I'm trying to get at. And I think they've got a good format right now. They've got a good formula. They've developed these rivalries: Eagles, Cowboys, Eagles, Giants, Eagles, Redskins. I mean, these are all those three teams. I hate them. So, and as far as other teams, I mean, other divisions maybe not having such great rivalries. I mean, I don't really see the Colts and the Texans as the best rivalry in sports.
And anybody versus the Patriots, yeah.
Right. I mean, the Patriots have just run away with that division for 20 years now. So, but I don't see where expanding the playoffs is going to help anything. If they're worried about the product and they want to get people back involved and get the revenue, I feel like you have to invest in and develop more quarterbacks and get that going, because the more stars you have in this league, the better. You don't want to dilute it by having more teams and more playoff teams to make that product come out a little less, how would I say it?
Well, I don't think that them extending out the playoff schedule in itself is going to make anything any better. I think that what they really need to look at is having the ability of trying to really make the regular season more important, and then try to make it so that when you get to the postseason, that it matters. And I think it's tough to try to find that happy medium in things, really. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up, since you mentioned the Redskins, is, and I don't really think this is going to happen. I want to preface it with this, but I saw this and I was like, oh, I kind of want to bring this up because this would be hilarious. So did you hear that Phillip Rivers might go to the Redskins?
I did hear this, and I'd kind of welcome it. I mean,
I'd be cool with it.
Let's be
As
honest.
an Eagles fan, sign me up.
Let's be honest. I mean, the guy is great at doing a couple things, having babies and throwing interceptions.
That's true. He's got, what, 9 kids?
That guy can't pull out of a driveway.
So Tony Pauline of the Pro Football Network reported on Friday that sources at the Combine tell me that they expect the Washington Redskins to make a bid for the quarterback, with him noting there's a sense that it'll take a massive contract to get Rivers to play for the franchise. And that's where I say right there that I don't think it's going to happen, because you have Dwayne Haskins sitting there waiting in the wings. So why would you throw some massive contract at Phillip Rivers, and then you're going to have Dwayne Haskins giving you the deuces, and you're going to have to figure out exactly what you're going to have to do from that point?
But wouldn't that be the most Daniel Snyder thing to do?
It really would. I mean, what do you think? Do you think Ron Rivera has a chance of doing anything with that franchise?
Given control, yes. With Daniel Snyder hovering over him, probably not. Same thing in Dallas. They're never going to do anything with Jerry Jones. And as an Eagles fan, you love to see it. You know, you love to see Jerry Jones making these god-awful moves, paying Zeke before you pay Dak, and not locking up the right player at the right time, and making these outlandish contracts and giving out these outlandish contracts to people before they really deserve it.
The whole Trent Williams situation.
Yeah, I mean, they botched that. I mean, that guy's a Hall of Fame left tackle. And, for him to come out and after many years of playing for the Redskins say, you guys screwed this up, I don't want to play for you anymore, or I'm not coming back this year. What's that say about that team? And
then you make the choice to keep him on your roster instead of getting something for him. Like, he sat on the bench the whole year and they didn't do anything with him, and they could have gotten some picks or something to get the cancer out of the locker room. And I only say that because once you say, get me out, that's what you are. And then you have to figure out how to move forward from there. So why knuckle down and be like, nope, you're staying, as if you really think you're punishing him?
No, you're not punishing him. He's sitting back in the cut, just relaxing, feeling good, not getting hurt, not getting injured anymore, collecting a paycheck. He's good. There's no problem there.
So since you mentioned collecting a paycheck, Tony Romo is about to get paid. Tony Romo earned an average of $9.1 million over 14 seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. He'll earn nearly double that in 1 year with CBS after reportedly signing a $100 million deal worth $17 million per year, which would make him the highest paid NFL analyst in TV history. And I don't even think it's close. I don't even think it's close. What are your thoughts on this? Because I know, for being an Eagles fan, I've made my fair share of Tony Romo jokes over the years. I don't think he's a bad guy. I think out of the grand scheme of the analysts, if I were to rank them, he would definitely be towards the top. What do you think?
I like him as an analyst. I think there's times where he can see it coming, and you're just like, if you saw this coming as an announcer, where were you when you played? And if I'm a Cowboys fan, that's infuriating, because I put myself in their position. All right, I'm a Cowboys fan, and Tony Romo is in the announcer's booth, basically playing Nostradamus on each and every play, and you're just like, wait a minute, how come you didn't do that with us? Where were you? What you could throw an interception really great, really well. That you were great at that, but as an announcer, it's like you're dissecting the play before pre-motion, pre-snap, and seeing exactly what's going to happen, and you call it out. And the only way I can explain it is that he either sees something or knows somebody in the league or at teams, or goes to their, in their pre-production, and is able to kind of get some insider information. I mean, otherwise it doesn't make sense to me.
I don't know that it necessarily doesn't make sense. To me, he should be able to make those reads with being a quarterback that has retired within the last several years. But the other thing that to me is, no pressure. You're up in the booth just relaxing,
Bird's
and you
eye
have
view.
the bird's eye view.
Yeah.
So I think if you add those two things in, and he doesn't have to be the one that carry the team, a guy can be ridiculously football smart. You can know all the right plays to make. It doesn't mean you can make them.
True.
You know what I mean? Like
True.
those who do, those who can't do, teach.
Right.
Just like that. So I really feel like it's something that possibly having that pressure off of him has allowed him to then become the Nostradamus of football almost.
And, you know, I say that, and I guess what I'm trying to say is it's fascinating to watch him in the booth because he's so good. And it was another thing to watch him play because there were times where he would just make the knucklehead decision. And the decision that he would make on the field when he played would be the same, or the opposite decision, I should say, when he's in the booth calling it out pre-snap. It's almost like he was two different people. On the field, he just made some dumb mistakes and dumb choices. But in the booth, it's almost like he's seeing it before it even happens. I like him. I do. I mean, I hate the Cowboys, and I hate to admit that I like him, but I do enjoy his broadcast.
Do you like him 10 or 20 times more than Joe Buck?
Can we go 1,000?
I think we can do any number that you would like.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Joe Buck and I are very polar opposites when it comes to how we see games. So him and Troy seem to be very pro Cowboy, and at least from my perspective. So they seem to have their favorites in the league, and they latch onto them. Aaron Rodgers is one that Joe Buck just latches onto him hard, and anything obviously Cowboys related. I give Troy Aikman a little credit because sometimes he will criticize the Cowboys a little bit more than others, and I think he probably feels like he can because of his association with the team. But any game I see with Troy Aikman and Joe Buck, I like turning down the volume.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to kind of bring it up, because honestly, since they've been doing the World Series for the last several years, it's really been a big disappointment to me, and I feel like things have kind of come down a notch. I really hope NBC can kind of get that back at some point, so at least I can enjoy my October baseball without having to hear his voice. But I will give him this, and I was going to bring this up, is that he was on Brockmire very briefly, and he played himself. And the guy, Brockmire, if you guys don't know what it is, it's Hank Azaria from The Simpsons. And he has a show where he's like the Harry Callis the broadcast announcer guy, but yet his life is just in shambles. And he's like a big alcoholic and a drug addict and different things, but yet it's hysterical. Like the bit that they have that they made this show out of is gold. And if you watch it, I highly recommend it. It's not for kids in any way, shape, or form, but it is comic gold. Anyway, so Joe Buck's in it, and the Brockmire character, the main character, hates him, and Joe Buck knows about it, and the back and forth between the two of them was pretty funny. So for him to lean into that a little bit, I like. But yet when you hear him say stuff like he'll not even be broadcasting a game that involves Philadelphia, and he'll be like, all right, Philly fans, relax. And he'll say things like that. And you're like, I don't even know why this is coming out of your mouth right now.
And every time the Eagles play around Christmas, they always seem to bring up Santa Claus and the snowballs and every stereotypical Philadelphia reaction to, Santa or, snowballs or throwing batteries at JD Drew or, anything like that. They always bring this stuff up. But then you see in other stadiums that there's way worse things happening. Every week you're seeing stuff. Every week you're seeing a fight in the stands. Or several years ago, there was a guy at the Giants-Dodgers game that got murdered in the parking lot after the game. But nobody brings that up. Nobody says what a bad fan base the Dodgers have or how scary it is to go to a Dodgers game. But every time they're in Philly, they sure bring up how much we hate Santa Claus.
It's funny because I think most people hear that and then they're like, oh man, terrible people. But what they don't realize is the Santa Claus that they threw the snowballs at was a fan. It wasn't even like, hey, we brought out a legitimate Santa Claus onto the field. This is the Eagles' official Santa Claus. And then we were like, screw that guy. And we pelted him with snowballs. No, it was a fan in the stands dressed up like Santa.
I don't think he had a beard.
One iota about a guy dressed up like Santa.
I don't even think the guy had a Santa Claus beard on that day.
I don't know. It might have been a hat, something. I haven't seen the video in a while. So to wrap up the whole Tony Romo bit, I want to talk to you about this point. the amount of money that this man is making is obscene. I love the fact that I want to make it seem like I'm hating on somebody for making money. Dude, do you? That's amazing. If you can pull that off, that's awesome. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Michael Thomas, who's slated to make $11 million next year, used Tony Romo's deal to push back against the new CBA proposal, tweeting, "That's why we shouldn't sign the new CBA agreement. No way the announcer should be making more than 90% of the players. Only 4 receivers have a salary cap value over $17 million. Sammy Watkins, Julio Jones, Mike Evans, and Tyreek Hill. 16 quarterbacks are above $17 million. So it's something that I think Dak Prescott's hoping to join the ranks of. But it's tough because if you're watching guys in the booth make that kind of obscene money, as a player, you have to be like, why is this happening? Why am I not making more money than this? But the other thing that I don't know that people are really thinking about is I wonder if deals like this, because they're talking about them looking at Peyton Manning for Monday Night Football, and I got to imagine that dude's not rolling out of bed for at least $4 million or more. So if that's the case, if they're looking at Peyton Manning and you're going to start having these guys start doing this, how long is it going to take before quarterbacks, different players on the field who are charismatic, or maybe even coaches leave the field for the broadcast booth? Because if I'm making more money in the broadcast booth than I'm making on the field, sign me up.
There's a lot less concussions in the broadcast booth.
Yeah, that's true, unless you're John Kruk fighting over onion rings. But it's it's going to be something that I think is going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because if you had guys that you can bring in who are charismatic, and if you're a coach, if you're a big name player, I think you're apt to be that, then you could really see these guys step away from the game we all love to watch early to go up in the booth and announce. So, and I think that that's not great. That's not a great thing for football, in my opinion.
No, and like you said, it's you're going to start seeing that, I think, because if you got a guy like Tony Romo making $17 million, what do you think somebody like you said, Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers or somebody that's a more popular quarterback coming out, remove them from the league, put them in a booth? I mean, you got CBS, you got Fox, you got NBC, and they're pretty entrenched with their broadcast teams. But we thought the same thing with CBS when who did Tony Romo replace? It was Vern Lundquist. Is that who it was?
I'm having a hard time remembering because all I can think of is Jason Witten. And I know that's not right.
Mr. Hair Plug himself.
Because I was trying to remember before we had started about like what the Monday night booth has been over the last couple of years, and you deal with Jason Witten and then going to the more Joe Desator, Booger McFarland booth, and it's like, do you think that Peyton Manning would have enough carry to bring Joe Desator to a happy place? Like, would make you I don't not like Joe. It's just he's not special. So you need somebody that has some gravitas, if you will, in that booth alongside him. I think Peyton, I love his commercials. Is it Nationwide is on your side commercials?
Right.
Was it Brad Paisley?
Brad Paisley, yeah.
Those are hilarious. So I think that he has the chops to be comedic and be knowledgeable and be likable. I don't think Aaron Rodgers, I met Aaron Rodgers like 4 or 5 years ago, and he seemed awkward to me. Now, granted, you're in a room full of people you don't know, meeting people you don't know. I'd probably be a little awkward too. But I don't ever get charisma from Aaron Rodgers in that sense of being an entertainer.
Right.
A leader, sure. Or, like a baller, cool. But as far as like being that guy in the booth, I don't really know that he could pull it off like a Peyton Manning. I think Peyton would be better than Aaron Rodgers would be.
I agree with you. Peyton's got street cred.
Sorry, Paul. Paul's a Packers fan.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say Peyton's got street cred. He's got SNL under his belt. He's got the Papa John's commercials. He's got, the Nationwide commercials. So he is a likable guy. He's a well-known guy beyond football. So even your average Joe that's watching it is going to know who he is because of his, exposure to advertising and things of that nature. So, I mean, it's like Shaq. Shaq will advertise anything. That guy is in every commercial, the General, the Ring doorbell. I mean, he's probably doing some women's underwear ads. I don't know, but he just
the Icy Hot.
Yeah,
he had all kinds of stuff.
So as a likable guy, I think Peyton would be a good would be a good fit for Monday Night Football. Could he bring Joe Tessitore up to a level where I would be able to stand him? Probably not. You can get rid of Booger right now, and I wouldn't miss him at all.
The meme of Booger McFarland is everything you need to know, and that's the part that's tough because as somebody who's trying to make it in the podcast realm, it's hard not to say the things that are obvious. But yet, when you were watching the game, and then you have people that are not brilliant masterminds of the sport and can sit back and listen to what you have to say, and it's like, yes, you just said the most obvious thing that you could have possibly said in that moment. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, him throw ball good.
All right, bud. 2 more stories left that I wanted to get to before we wrap up. The initial one is last week we touched on a little bit about Alshon Jefferey and if we thought that he should stay with the Eagles or if he should go. I know that you had really felt like it was something that you would rather him stay than go to see what we can do about it. But apparently the overwhelming consensus was that Jefferey, despite the salary cap hit, his foot injury, and the Eagles' lack of talent at wide receiver, would not be wearing midnight green in 2020. While there may never be any proof that he was behind the anonymous quotes to the ESPN criticizing Wentz and the Eagles' offense, many inside the NovaCare complex believe he was the source. And shortly after the report, a prominent player on offense confronted Jeffery to the point where they had to be separated. Wentz doesn't necessarily have any problem with Jeffery, and on the surface they get along fine, which could be one reason why Peterson denied it on Tuesday, that there was any friction between the two, but the receiver and quarterback have lacked chemistry on the field, and their relationship off of it has increasingly turned frosty. So what are your thoughts about that, knowing that a prominent player on the offense ended up having to be separated? And 2, I would probably give you 2 guesses as to who you think that player might have been, because I have 2 guesses as to who I think it might have been.
I was thinking about this earlier today when I saw the story come out about this. And first of all, let me touch on this, on Jeffery staying or going. I almost want to take back what I said last week about him staying, if this report is true. Because 2017-18, when they went to the Super Bowl and won, that team was like glued together. Nothing went wrong. There was no cancer in that locker room. There were no stories coming out. It was like everything went their way. And then since then, it's been a little dissent here, a little dissent there, and you're hearing the Josina Anderson report, and then you're hearing all these little leaks coming out about Jeffery not being a Carson guy, and he was a Nick guy, and Nick throwing the ball more, and you're starting to hear this more, and where there's smoke, there's fire. So I feel like if that's really true and there was a player that confronted him in the locker room, I don't know if you can bring him back, because at what point is that relationship fractured to the point of no return? Now, as far as who I think it was, I think my very first guess is Jason Kelce.
That was mine. That was my first guess.
My very first guess is Kelce, because Kelce's the guy that, other than Carson, other than the quarterback, which is a natural leadership role, Jason Kelce's got the chops that would really kind of stir up some notice. You know, he's going to get noticed in the locker room. He's going to make himself noticed, and he's a leader. He's on the leadership council. And my second guess would probably be Jason Peters.
I went Lane Johnson.
That's a good choice. I didn't. You know what? I went left tackle. I went left tackle, but Lane Johnson seems like an obvious answer there too. But
he's been vocal in support of Carson in the past,
very much, yeah.
And so I feel like he would be, and I don't think he's afraid to speak his mind in the grand scheme of things.
He doesn't hold his tongue very well.
No, so it would be my guess that it was either Jason Kelce or it was Lane Johnson. Jason Peters, I don't know with his contract situation right now if that would be something to where he would have a whole lot of clout in the locker room, although he's such a veteran. It's like one of those things where you could brush it off like, man, you're not even going to be here very much longer, so why do I need to listen to what you have to say?
But at the same time, I felt that Jason would have required or demanded that respect because he's a Hall of Fame type player, and because he's been on the team so long and been that rocket left tackle. And it being probably his last year, maybe last year was his last year. I don't know. He wants to come back. They want him back. Maybe can they pay him? Can they make it work? I don't know. But if it's your last year and it's your last shot and you think it's your last shot, then maybe he would have done that. Maybe he would have gotten in his face and said, calm down. This is we've got to get this together. We have to band together as a team and make it work.
Good points. All good points. We may never know. And I mean, I hope that they can figure it out for sure. I just don't know that with things in the situation that they are right now, what the Birds are really going to be able to do to pull it out. Let me ask you a quick question. What do you think you get for him on the market?
For
Alshon for a trade? Do you think you get a first-round pick for him? I don't think so.
Absolutely not. No, you're going to do well just to get some of that salary off of your books. So I could see, a fourth or a fifth. I think you'd be lucky to get a fourth, as long as they took some salary.
Ooh. Yeah, that's true. It is a lot of salary. I mean, it's tough because with his injuries and the salary, it's going to be tough wherever he has to go. I don't feel like you're going to get a ton back.
No, and he's getting older. So how much does he have left in the tank after these couple of injuries? And if he's going to have that reputation of being a locker room, rat, if you will, how much is going to play a role in who takes him on?
It makes a little bit more sense now why the Bears might have been okay with getting rid of him.
I didn't think about that, but yeah, I mean, he was in his prime when he played for them. So
I was pretty surprised when that deal went down. I was like, wow, okay, cool, I'm down with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, when he came to the Eagles, it was like, really, we're getting this top level wide receiver for a 1-year deal. I mean, he could have signed with anybody, and he came here for a 1-year deal, and he maximized it by getting a multi-year contract. But we're kind of hurting from now. But when he left the Bears, it was kind of surprising.
So I saved the most fun story for last. One of the things that we've talked about several times, not on the show, but just in our personal lives, is about the drug policy with MLB and with NFL. And you have guys that you see like Josh Gordon, who seemingly can't seem to get themselves together. And now it's interesting because I know from Pat McAfee, I watch a lot of his show, and knowing because he had his own troubles and he got in trouble and he had to go through the whole policy and procedures thereafter. You essentially, if you're a regular NFL player, for people that don't know out there, you're only going to get tested once a year. It's an annual test, which actually starts on 4/20, consequently, which is pretty hilarious. And it's not like everybody lines up and they test everybody all at once. It is going to be something to where they essentially do, I think it's like 20% or a little bit over that. But it's not everybody's going at the same time. It's a little more random, but roughly around when the test is going to happen. So if you have any common sense at all and don't want to lose money, then you can abstain and then you can keep playing football. But it looks like that might not even be that much of a problem anymore. You might have already heard that MLB actually removed marijuana from its list of abuse drugs earlier this offseason. It was removed from the list of drugs of abuse and will be treated the same as alcohol as a part of the changes announced on Thursday to the joint drug agreement between MLB and the Players Association. In addition, suspensions for marijuana use will be dropped off from the minor league drug program, and the joint drug program, that's a great name. The joint drug program agreement apparently did not eliminate penalties from using marijuana, according to the memo obtained by ESPN. For baseball players taking advantage of a new drug policy in which marijuana use is permissible, the commissioner has a warning. Just don't show up to the ballpark high.
Tell that to all the 80s MLB players that showed up, cranked out on coke. Doc Gooden.
Yeah, who was that guy that threw that no? And he was
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was a Netflix documentary about that.
He was on like LSD or something.
Yeah.
To me, that's insane. That's
it's
so
pretty nuts.
crazy.
What do you think about this? Do you have a problem with them removing marijuana from the MLB substance abuse policy? I, for myself, think, that it's not something that is a performance-enhancing drug. I think it's nice to give guys an alternative to opiates to allow for them to have some kind of pain relief in their life, or sleep relief, or anxiety relief, or what have you. So it's nice to have that option. And I think instead of having, because if you don't do that, your alternatives, if you want to, partake in any kind of form, would be you have alcohol or prescription drugs. And those are both bad roads to go down. So at least you have some kind of alternative.
Yeah. And, from a personal standpoint, I really feel like it's not a problem. It's no worse than alcohol. As long as you do it in a controlled environment and you do it responsibly, like every alcohol commercial tells you to do, there's really no problem with it. Just don't come to the ballpark high. Don't come to the ballpark drunk. It's the same rules. The same rules apply. It's just a different form of inebriation, basically.
How many times do you think John Kruk rolled into the ballpark a little hungover?
Every day. every day.
Was it Lenny Dykstra's speech when he got into the Phillies Wall of Fame when they were talking about the mountain of beer cans under his bed?
I don't remember.
It was one of them. They were talking about essentially walking into his hotel room and seeing the plethora of beer cans that would align the floor. But
it would only make sense for Kruk to have that.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, it's tough when you have now where that's become where weed's becoming legal in certain states now, not federally, obviously, but on a state level. I know that the NFL has really kind of said, well, if you're going to play here, then this is something that you're just going to have to deal with for right now. But I wonder if the NFL will be able to follow suit at some point, so that way we can have these guys like Josh Gordon, who's clearly a talent, get to have an actual career. I don't know, honestly, what would make somebody not be able to abstain, for that much money. I understand how some people feel like you're maybe not making the best decisions if you can't pull yourself together for millions of dollars. But man, there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of things they're dealing with in life. There's a lot of people out there that have a lot of mental stuff that they're trying to figure out that they just don't know what to do with to get around. Who are we to judge what those people do if they're not hurting people? To allow them to get through their everyday, and I don't feel like that's hurting anyone. And I feel like that's the main crux of the whole thing. If you're not hurting anybody and you're not endangering other people, then you should be able to do whatever the hell you want.
I agree. And you got a guy like, take, for example, Chris Long. Chris Long retires from the NFL and he says, yeah, I've smoked marijuana every day since whatever, coming into the league. He smoked it almost every day. He just knew when to stop, like you said, to pass a test.
That's the part that blew my mind because I didn't know that. I had no idea it was an annual test.
No.
Now, if you get popped on the annual test, you will be peeing in a cup all over the place because it's crazy how you essentially become somebody that's on parole at that point.
Right.
And that's what Pat McAfee was talking about. Like if you decide to go on vacation, you have to call the NFL, tell them where you're going to be on an everyday by minute basis. And at any point they could send somebody out to essentially collect your pee and then test you on the spot. One of the things that I thought was hilarious was they were talking about how they were asking Pat McAfee, hey, did you ever have a really good game? And then after the game, Goodell didn't test you, and then you got mad about it. Like, man, look at what I just did on the field. You don't think I'm juicing? Like, what's wrong with you? And he was like, yeah, man. He's like, every time I'd have a great game, I get off the field, and I'm like, come on, Goodell, come get this pee.
Well, but think about that. That's really a good point is, how many guys have, a 60-yard field goal to win the game? Like, I wonder if Jake Elliott got tested after that Giants game or just anybody that shows out one week, and gets
you hear about certain guys that say they get it all of the time.
That's what's great about Twitter because you get to see this in real life. I mean, these guys, they're not afraid to take a picture of that letter saying report to such and such office for a drug test. And there's certain guys out there that say I've been tested every week for the past 6 weeks or whatever the case may be. So, is it random? Is it targeted? I don't know. It's hard to say, but that rule and having marijuana be less lethal, so to say, for players, I think is a good thing because look at it from a real life perspective and how many people are sitting in jail right now for having a little bit of weed on them.
Yep.
Not hurting nobody, not doing anything, not killing people, not selling heroin, not, it's being other than that, being a quote unquote good person. And they're sitting in jail for a little bit of weed. So correlate that back to the NFL where these guys like Josh Gordon are pretty much banished for smoking a little dope. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. And I feel like as the years go on and it becomes more prevalent, more legal throughout the country and states, and then eventually it's going to be federally legal. There's only one way this train's going to go. And eventually when it gets to that point, it's going to be looked at just the same as alcohol is.
I think it's when you have guys like Josh Gordon that have that problem, I think it's, tough to have to live through that situation. But yet if you don't have these guys that go through those things that unfortunately then we can learn from their example, that, how do we know these things in retrospect a lot of times.
Right.
And I think with a lot of these guys, they'll find their happy mediums. I'm sure Josh could find ways to make money in his life and try to find his own peace with things. I mean, hey, maybe we could see him in the XFL one day. Who knows? I doubt it, but it's just nice to see that we have these different things where times are changing, if they will. And we know we can bicker and we can joke about the rule changes they make with MLB and with the NFL and changing up the playoffs or how many teams or what have you. But yeah, at the end of the day, these guys are still everyday people. They're still human beings who have problems. So it's nice to see that these guys get a chance to be themselves a little bit more. And maybe we can kind of see more people get a chance where others haven't. So I think that'll wrap up our latest episode of the Muffed Punt podcast. I'm going to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank Ralph for showing up as always. And for Ralph and for myself, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your night.
It's my turn. It is. You told me it was my turn.
You can talk all that you want to, yell and scream. You lost.
It is my turn.
You lost the game. Take as long as you want. You still lost.